Hi, good day. Welcome to the U interview. My name is Anna, and we are here with Mr. Andy Conn. You know, after a car accident, a lot of people feel very overwhelmed. They're unsure about what to do next. You may be dealing with injuries, medical appointment, vehicle repairs, missed work, so many things on top of insurance company calls, which overwhelms us all, even if it's not in a vehicle accident. So at the same time, you may be thinking, is this minor? Is this complicated? What could I do? And it is very common to think, do I have to hire a car accident attorney? Is this unnecessary? Is this something that I would only need if it's a serious case? However, many of those problems don't really appear right away. You know, injuries can worsen, insurance company can try to dictate your claim. So, like I said, I'm here joined by Andy Conn, founder of Conn Law Firm, a personal injury law firm that's based in Savannah, Georgia. And while we are going to introduce that Andy focuses heavily on car accident cases, one of his main pinpoints is to help people who are injured, subtly navigating this very difficult system where they can be feeling very overwhelmed and impersonal. So today, we're not here just to talk about law, but we also want to talk about the person behind it, how Andy approaches his work, how he thinks about his responsibility and obligations, what he believes his clients truly need after a serious accident. So, Andy, how are you doing today? Thank you very much for joining us.
Hey, I'm doing well. I appreciate the intro there. That was very nice.
Thank you. Thank you. We very much appreciate your time with us today. We really want to get to know, your purpose, your background, what motivates you, and the main reason why Andy Conn is one of the best personal injury attorneys out there, right?
Yeah, well, I hope so. Hope my clients feel that way, and always strive to make them feel, very very good about the work that we do for them.
And that's great. We really want to get to know, the origin story and who Andy is behind the attorney. And we know that you grew up in South Carolina and you moved to Georgia for school, never left. But before, Conn Law existed, before you were handling all of these car accident cases, you were in the day in, day out. What was it that originally pushed you towards becoming not specifically a personal injury or car accident attorney, but just becoming an attorney? Can you tell us a little bit about your purpose and inspiration behind law school?
Yeah, sure. So, like you said, I grew up in Spartanburg, South Carolina, born and raised there, and then went to school at University of Georgia for undergrad and law school. I feel like a lot of people, didn't know what they wanted to do. I kind of always, from the time I was probably in middle school, I wanted to be a lawyer. I really, I've always liked helping people, but, it always seemed like something super interesting. And I never wanted to do something where, I would just be, strictly in an office all day long. Certainly lawyers are in offices and we do have times where we're not getting out in the community, but, everything that I could tell about the attorneys who I had seen in my life, up to that point, they seemed like they were very active in the community, like their job was interesting. And so I really always sort of wanted a piece of that. I always wanted to be involved with that. And like you mentioned, I didn't initially know exactly what type of lawyer I wanted to be, but that's kind of I guess, as you said, the origin story. And me as a big sci-fi geek, I like you referring to it that way.
And when you say a sci-fi geek, how do you, make that combination between law school and being a lawyer and that part of the sci-fi community?
Oh, I think I wish that I was as cool as like a superhero or something like that. My wife probably thinks that I think that about myself, but no, I don't know if there's much overlap between the superhero stories and lawyers, but I actually do. I had one client. I'll show you if I can find it. Oh, here it is. One client who I helped out with a pro bono case who did make this little bobblehead action figure of me. So
Oh,
that was
that's so
her
nice.
that was her payment for me doing a little bit of help for her for free.
Well, it definitely does seem like you have a very deep connection to the community. And, whenever I personally feel that if someone goes out of their way to, even if it's not, like you said, like a payment way in the work field, the fact that that specific client went out of his way to try and commemorate that time that you worked together, it really does speak volumes of the work that you did. And for a moment there, I thought you were going to mention Daredevil. I don't know if you've ever read his comics or
Love
know,
Daredevil. Yeah,
he is an attorney, and I think
that's
that
right.
comes into that realization of was there a specific point maybe during law school or growing up with that sense of community that you felt you could be a tool to help people if they're dealing with anything with their case that becomes a stressful moment in their life? Was there a specific realization growing up or studying that you guided yourself into personal injury?
Yeah, it was really that first year in law school. I had an older brother who at that time was a lawyer, but we didn't have any other family members who were lawyers or anything like that. So when I went to law school, I knew nothing really. And there were a lot of folks who either had, parents or grandparents who were judges or lawyers that were at law school, and they seemed like they knew exactly what they wanted to do when they were coming in. I really had no idea. I just liked sort of the allure of being a lawyer and sort of what that entailed. But during my first year in law school, your professors will have you argue against yourself in the courses. So you'll argue one side of the point, and then the professor will tell you to completely change your argument and argue against yourself. I always had a very easy time arguing for, cases we would look at where there was an injured victim or there was somebody who was harmed or in some way wronged by someone else. I had a very easy time making that argument. I always had a very difficult time making the counter argument for, the wrongdoer. And so it became very apparent to me very quickly in law school that I was meant to be on the side of helping folks who have been injured or who are, victims of someone else's wrongdoing in several different ways.
Wow. Very, very, it was a very clear path from what I can tell for you. And, if I may, speaking of first years, we do know that, well, you've talked about your first year of college, but we also know that for your first year of practice, you were selected for the GTLA lead program. Did you bring that type of leadership potential from learning that you really most enjoy that side of the clients when trying to become an attorney?
Yeah, you mentioned that. I think it was right there in the first year I was selected that class. I was as shocked as anybody that I got in that early on in my career. But it definitely, I would say at that point, I didn't feel very much like a leader.
Okay.
And I would say being in the lead class actually helped me sort of honed some of those leadership skills. I think I'm still trying to hone those skills, never quit learning sort of thing, but definitely helped me realize that, really anybody can be a leader. It just really takes a want to and trying to help others, makes it a lot easier to lead when you're really doing something for somebody else and trying to help somebody else.
No, complete. And, looking back at those early years when you learned that about yourself, is there something else that you learned really early on that, that still guides you on the way that you practice today?
I don't know if it's any one thing in particular that I learned. I think more so just when you sit in somebody's living room, and I've handled all sorts of cases, car wreck cases, like you mentioned, but everything up to medical malpractice to products liability. The majority of my cases over the years have been wrongful death cases or catastrophic injury cases. So by and large, when I'm sitting in someone's living room, I'm there to help them for the worst day of their life, whether they were injured or became a paraplegic or they lost a loved one. I've had to sit in these living rooms before, and I think the learning that I've received is just that these people truly. I mean, you hear about frivolous lawsuits all the time, right? When you sit in these people's living rooms, you realize very quickly people's motivations aren't money. People's motivations are to right a wrong, And people's motivations are for justice and to prevent these things from happening in the future, because that's one thing lawsuits can do. It's not just an avenue for compensation. It's an avenue to change practices in different industries, whether that's a trucking company changing their safety practices to become a safer company to lead to less wrecks, which leads to less injuries and less death. That's 99% of my clients' motivation in bringing lawsuits. And so what I've learned is that is the most important thing, is giving them that justice, giving them that sense of peace, as opposed to just, collecting money.
Well, thank you very much for letting us know that. And we can actually talk a little bit about it. And now that you mentioned that type of motivation, we do know that you take a limited number of cases to focus on those clients. And if we could talk about that misconception, I know that a lot of personal injury lawyers, have a bad reputation for that stereotype of ambulance chasers. And when someone hears that as a client, when they meet you, like you mentioned, sitting in their living room and that type of personal connection that you try to make with them, whenever you do that with a specific client, is there anything that you hope that they walk away thinking instead of that very specific misconception of personal injury lawyers?
Yeah, I think, by and large, like you said, when I'm sitting in someone's living room, or if they've come into my office about something, there are certainly bad lawyers out there. There are bad people in every single industry. There are lawyers who give a name to ambulance chasers. And frankly, there's lawyers who don't approach the practice of law very ethically. And so I completely understand when people throw out the term ambulance chaser, because those folks do exist. That's certainly never been my practice. And every client that I've ever had in my life has either come from a referral from another attorney who trusts me with the person that they know, or a friend or anybody in the community. And so by the time I'm sitting down with them, they certainly don't feel like their case is insignificant, and it never is. Even some of the smaller cases I've handled that aren't the permanent injuries or the wrongful death cases over the years, that's still something that's very important to this person, whether they had a back injury or a neck injury or whatever it may be. Their case is the most important case to them. And I have to treat every single one of those clients the same way. And I take I take pride in treating every single client, no matter how big or small their cases are, and try to apply the same principles I do for the big med mal cases as I do the smaller, what some people would term smaller car wreck cases. But yeah, that term ambulance chaser, outside of the bad apples in the industry, most of the people in my community are handling it very professionally and getting their clients in a very ethical manner.
And it's I believe it's such a beautiful thing to be able to treat cases, whether it's, like you said, a very big medical malpractice case, or it's quote unquote a simple personal injury, a car accident, or whichever it is, the type of client that approaches you. I think it's a very respectful and beautiful thing to be able to handle those cases as you said, this is the most important case for this person, and by that reach, it's in a very important case for me as an attorney. And I think that varies a lot with what clients experience at your law firm, not specifically only with you. I do know that you, as the owner of Conn Law, you're essentially the image. And when someone calls Conn Law after the accident, they're probably scared. They're probably very stressed. Maybe they've never talked to an attorney before. So being able to connect with your law firm and yourself as a person, and feeling that importance of, this attorney feels the way I feel about my situation. They might not feel as embarrassed or overwhelmed about their situation. And we really love if you could, talk us through that first conversation when you personally want to make that happen, beyond the legal aspect. You said, for that amount of limited cases that you could take, that, so in order to really focus, could you guide us whenever you do take that initial call? How does that conversation happen, like in your head? What are you trying to commit beyond just the paperwork?
Yeah, every situation is obviously very, very different. Every client is unique, and every case is unique. And so you're right. It's almost always clients are overwhelmed because something very terrible's happened, and like you mentioned, there's insurance companies calling them, and in larger accidents, there are investigators. Maybe the police is calling them to find out more information, and my job is just to say, I've got this. You worry about if you're personally injured. You worry about taking care of yourself and getting the medical treatment that you need. Let me handle everything else. If anybody's calling you or harassing you, tell them that you're represented by an attorney, and then I'm here to help. And I really just try to take all the stress that I can off of my clients, because this is what I do every single day. Mm-hmm. And when they've had an accident, or they've had a loved one who has had an accident or passed away, I find that they, especially early on, want somebody to just kind of take the wheel and help them manage it, because whether you need to grieve or whether you need to get medical treatment, you don't want to be worrying about letters and insurance carriers and all of those different things. So I really try to put them at ease, and let them know that I'll be happy to share as much information as you want, or you can just kind of let me take over, and you don't have to worry about this anymore.
And have you ever had a client that it's a good thing that you give them those two options. I can either explain this to you or I can take over. A lot of people, myself included, if I were to be in a car accident, I believe I would be the type of to be like, I don't want to think. Please take over, as you know what's best for me. But if having the case of someone wanting to understand, do you have any specific method when breaking things down to a client in order for them to understand what's happening without feeling overwhelmed by the legal jargon or the type of paperwork needed? Do you feel like you have a personal structure, or you just have such a clear understanding of it that you are able to help them understand in a much simpler way?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the legal jargon. I mean, these are people who didn't go to law school, and frankly, I think a lot of times as lawyers, we speak like lawyers when we should be speaking like humans. And so my main goal is to be human, and to try to explain the things that are going on in a very human way for somebody who didn't go to law school. And I don't really have a set structure. I don't have like an outline of questions or, explanations I give. I try to give sort of the basics, and I let people know, like, listen, I'm happy to go into as much detail as you would like me to go into, but I'm just going to start with the basics. Here's how this process works. Here's, what I can do for you. And here's, sort of what your involvement can be like in this process. And then I always take time to answer any questions that they have, because some clients have 1,000 questions that they want to ask every little thing, and I'm happy to go through in very specific detail and answer each one of those. Some of them, like you said, just say, I appreciate you, but can you just take this over? I don't want to think about it. I just want to get healthy, or I just want to grieve my loved one. Yeah. And so I leave it up to them. I try to be as concise as possible on the front end, so I'm not overwhelming them. But if they want more information, I spend as much time as we need for them to feel comfortable that they understand how this process works, and what they can potentially gain from the process.
And do you ever feel the need to also take control with the amount of details? For example, I know that there may be a lot of confusion in the states after any type of accident, whether it or any type of case. Have you ever felt the need to let them know that the more they ask, the more information they want to retain, the more they research, the more they're going to feel overwhelmed instead of at peace? I know a lot of people sometimes think that they need information and they want information, but it ends up being this convoluted mess in their head where it's stopping you from that success in the case. Have you ever had to deal with that type of situations?
Yeah, again, every client's very different. Some clients are able to manage a lot of information, and want to know. Some are just interested in the process. It's not necessarily that they have to know all of this information for me to be able to successfully represent them. But some people are just interested. They want to know what's going on with their case. And so I really just take it as what they want. I give them as much or as little information as possible. I've got a case right now where my client's son unfortunately passed at 18 years old. And there's some body cam video that shows some of what happened to him. And I'm very honest with my clients. I say, listen, we have this evidence. I don't think that you want to see it, but it's yours at the end of the day. This is your case file. You get to decide what you want to do. And most of the time in those situations, they say, I'm happy you have the information and the evidence, but I don't want to see that. And so I'm here to be able to insulate them as much as they want. But I'm also here to give them all of the information that they want to know about. I'm here to give them that information or to open up the file so that they can see for themselves what's going on with their case if they so choose.
No, understandable. And I think it's also a very difficult thing for you to handle, being that you essentially are that buffer, not only within the law, paperwork, insurance, but also sometimes for that type of cases, a very kind of an emotional buffer to try and also protect, your client and their emotional stability when it comes to cases like this. So I believe that a lot of and we can go back to that little superhero bobblehead. I'm pretty sure that person felt that you were that emotional stability for them. And I believe it's a very important thing to have that type of trust in the success of your attorney.
Yeah, and we us attorneys in the personal injury world double as therapists. I have, even cases that I don't take, I've sat on the phone or in a meeting with potential clients for hours that I know I'm not going to accept the case because of some legal reason or some other reason, but I still want to be a resource for them, because again, this is the most important thing to them, and while I'm meeting with them about their case, it's the most important thing to me. And but yeah, we definitely double as I think therapists at times.
Definitely. And when it comes to cases, do you believe that is something that your clients would often say about working with you? I didn't expect that this was going to turn out this way, but when working specifically with Andy Conn, I really did feel that I was a human being treated by another human in the correct sense of how they handled my case and my emotions.
Yeah, I can tell you, I'm not good at everything, right? There's many things that I wish I was much better at. One thing I think though that you would hear across the board from my clients over, the 12, 13 years that I've been practicing is they can trust me. And I've always been here for them. Every single one of my clients gets my cell phone number, not my office line. So they text me, they call me. Sometimes I don't have time to call them back right away. I might be in a deposition or investigating the scene of some other incident, but I always try to get back to them as soon as possible. And I've formed such a close connection with so many clients over the years and they mean so much to me. And I hope that I meant, a lot to them as well and gave them that peace of mind. But yeah, I mean, hopefully you set expectations at the beginning of a case when you first meet with these people so that at the end of the case, it's not necessarily unexpected. Hopefully it's successful and it goes the way that you want, but you always have to manage expectations and make sure that folks understand the range of possibilities because, oftentimes these cases are, when you try a case to a jury verdict, it's in Georgia, we have to convince 12 out of 12 people that we are right and that, the value of the case is what we say it is. If there's one juror who disagrees with that, then we either lose or the value of the case goes down. So I try to manage expectations that as important as this is to you, the client, and me, your attorney, we still have to convince 12 strangers that it's that important as well.
And with that expectation, do you have a specific method of defining the type of success to your client? Once the case is over, you're driving home to your family, what makes you feel like you are actually able to help this person when it comes to, for in the attorney world, success could mean a lot of big things. It could be a very big verdict, a quick settlement, or something else entirely. But when it comes to Andy Conn and their client, is there a specific way when defining those metrics that you try to define success for them in a specific matter?
Yeah, and I'm very upfront and very honest with my clients on the front end. I can never guarantee an outcome. The case can really have, two results. Either we are able to resolve the case out of court and settle it, or, you pursue it and you go to a jury trial. And, in either of those instances, I can't predict an outcome. All I can do is work as hard as I possibly can, as tirelessly as I can, to get the best result possible. And again, I think that's one thing that you would consistently hear from my clients over the years is, regardless of the result, I did everything I possibly could to maximize their goals, which again, money is important and compensation for injuries is important, but that's not the only goal. And that's not the only thing that my clients are seeking. They're seeking, justice, and they're seeking changing policies and things like that. And so success to me is doing everything in my power to maximize the goals of my clients.
Great. And if I may say so myself, I've researched you quite a lot. I really didn't want to know the man behind it. And from my personal experience when learning about your work and everything, I feel like you very much demonstrate results without bragging. There's a lot of authority without it being salesy. And I feel like I could believe in someone like Andy Conn. And I know you've been practicing for 11 years now. We learned that, it's a decade of being Georgia's most respected trial firms. And it comes in a moment where you defined evolution, and like I said, I feel like it's that success on your person, not only as an attorney, but Andy Conn, the person. There's a lot of experiences that may have changed the way that you approach your work today compared to when you first started. And it doesn't feel in a way that you elevate yourself without the backup of your clients as well. Could you tell us a little bit about that type of evolution that you may feel that happened when you started your law firm and moved into the attorney that you are to this day, 11 years after?
Yeah, I've been very fortunate over the years to have some amazing clients, and there's some results on my website that anybody can see that, we've had some really great successes. But I think you nailed it when you said it would be impossible to have those types of results without having the types of clients who deserve those types of results. Because I don't care how good of an attorney you are, and there are good and there are bad attorneys. But if you don't have a client who's deserving and who's willing to also trust you with, again, the worst day of their life, helping them handle, the aftermath of a tragedy, then I wouldn't have those results. No attorneys would be able to have those results. And so, especially in the trial successes I've had, I mean, those are some of the most genuine, good people that I've represented in those trials. And when I put them on the stand, and again, there's 12 strangers staring at them, and they're always very nervous before they go on. But then I think it just melts away when they truly believe in what they're pursuing. I've put witnesses, clients on the stand who've lost sons and daughters, and trying to explain the impact of that to 12 strangers is a very difficult thing for them to do. But the reason they're so successful at it is because they're just genuine good people, and they don't come across as just seeking compensation. They come across because they genuinely are seeking something much more. And so you're totally right. My success I wouldn't have any without the amazing clients that I've had and still do have today.
All right. And I'm speaking about clients and the type of tragedy and having to explain to those 12 strangers, essentially, that empathic link of this is a human who has gone through a tragedy without necessarily you going through something specific like that. But I read about one of the cases that you handled. It was a medical malpractice case where a doctor's negligence led to that patient taking their own life. And without going to anything specific that, you can't share, is there anything from that type of cases that you would like to share that they taught you about the weight of this work and how it has affected you outside of being an attorney, but on your own personal level when it comes to that definition of the case?
It's funny you mentioned that case, because when I was describing, a dad being on the stand for the loss of a son's or a daughter's life, it was that case that I was thinking of. And what have I learned from those clients? That mom and dad who had to bury their son, what I learned is how tragic that must have been. And while I didn't know these people before I represented them, I got to be very close. I'm still very close. I still text with them. We check in. We talk on the phone every now and again. And even though that case has been tried and we're no longer pursuing those claims against the doctor, they still mean a lot to me. And so it makes me look at my own family. I have 3 young kids, and I use my kids a lot, I'll say, in my trials, not in a bad way, but in a way that I try to think about what that must be like. It's really hard to think about, right? Losing a child. I can't imagine what it must actually feel like to go through something like that. And so I try to channel some of that, I guess, emotion to try to empathize with my clients. And so in that particular case, they were just terrific people who had the worst imaginable tragedy you could possibly have. And so when mom and dad went on the stand, and his sisters, the gentleman who'd passed away, his sisters went on the stand as well. You learn a lot about family. You learn a lot about tragedy, unfortunately, but yeah.
And it sounds like such a harsh case. I thank God I haven't had, the moment where I've lost a loved one or a family member. I cannot even imagine the type of weight that it could pull on someone. And I want to focus that, yes, it's a very big case. But, if you would be able to tell for anyone listening who might think that their case is too small, based on the one that we just mentioned, where the worst thing that could possibly happen is death. In some cases, at least I'm the type of person when I think, what is the worst thing that could happen? Well, I could die. But there are so many factors on worst case scenario depending on the person. So if there is someone listening who has just gone through a car accident or medical malpractice or anything when it comes to personal injury, is there anything that you would be able to tell them about how a value really gets determined when it comes to a case?
Yeah, I unfortunately have to have this conversation all the time that when we talk about values of cases, we're not actually talking about what someone's life is worth, unfortunately, in a death case, for instance, because what a loved one of yours, what their life is worth, there's no amount of money. Mm-hmm. It's priceless. I've never met a single client who would have accepted $1 trillion if they could just bring back their loved one. That's the thing that they want that unfortunately I can't get to them. But when you talk about case value, it's not what is this person's life or what is your pain that you're suffering from a car accident or a trucking accident. That's not really the question that we have to look at from the legal side of things. We have to look at the case value is, again, what are 12 people who none of us have ever met before, who, while they can be sympathetic and empathetic, they might not see it the same way as you. Mm-hmm. And they're also at times going to have sympathy for the defendants in these cases. I think that's lost on a lot of people. When a doctor commits medical malpractice, jurors don't just want to punish them by and large. Sometimes when they're really bad, they might. By and large, they don't want to punish the doctor. Mm. So you also have to consider the sympathy they're going to have for the defendant in the case, because that's a real thing. And so I have this conversation all the time with clients is we're not here from the legal side to talk about the value of your loved one or your pain, because that's not what I can give you. I can't give you the full value of that because that's impossible. What we can do is talk about what 12 strangers, how they are going to value that. And that's how I approach each case.
And when it comes to that client, have you ever had, a difficult time trying to explain to them, we know that the value placed on your life or on your loved one it's unmeasurable. We're not going to be able to pinpoint and exactly tell you, but having to explain to them, we are going to have to put a value and a measure to 12 people who you don't know, they don't know you, but it's just a process that we're going to have to go through. Have you ever had, like a difficult or emotional time with a client, having to let them know about how the process would work with them?
Yeah, I think every case has a certain level of difficulty in explaining that. And I do have clients that, even after having that sort of conversation, have a very difficult time accepting that and understanding that the value that they put on something might be different than 12 strangers. By and large, though, my clients are very understanding, and they understand. And I tell them, from the front end, when I talk about case value, I'm putting on lawyer Andy hat. And we're talking about something that has nothing to do with the true value of your loved one's life or the true value of the pain that you've suffered. And if it was up to me, it would be probably more than 12 strangers are going to say the worth is. But I think most clients ultimately come around and they understand that they don't get to be the jurors and the plaintiffs at the same time. And so usually where it's a difficult conversation is when you're deciding whether to settle a case or not. And I'm always very upfront with my clients. I can advise them and tell them, from based on my experience, what may or may not happen, but I don't get to make the decisions ever. They get to make the decision whether to settle a case or not. So sometimes it is difficult for them to settle a case because it almost feels like they're admitting that the value is less than what they put on it. But ultimately, they, the ones who do resolve the case outside of court realize the risk of going to trial and having 12 strangers decide their fate.
I feel like I couldn't imagine going through a situation like that without an attorney that saw that in myself as well. I think it's a very beautiful source of pride for you, knowing that it's a reflection of your career. And talking about pride, is there a part of your work that gives you like a very great sense of pride that you would like to mention?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. The main one I think I've talked about already a lot is just I'm very proud of my clients and the people that I represent and the motivations that they have for bringing a lawsuit, which what you hear in the news is, something very different than what I actually see on a day-to-day basis. So I take a lot of pride in representing people who are good people, who genuinely have the right types of motivations. And I get to pick my clients, frankly. So when I interview that client on day one, I've turned down cases that could be, high compensation type cases. But if it's not a right fit for the client, it's not somebody that I can really go to bat for and fight for, then I've turned down those cases before. I'd say probably the other thing that I take a lot of pride in is my MO has always been, you might be smarter than me. You might be prettier than me. You might be a lot of things that I'm not, but you will never outwork me. And there's not a case I've ever been outworked on. I've faced some really tough, hardworking defense attorneys. I take pride in never letting somebody outwork me on a case. And success or no success on a case, I take pride in the fact that I did everything I possibly can in any scenario to help each and every one of my clients.
For everyone listening, gorgeous answer. We love it. But I want to let you know, this is one modest attorney. And I will be the one to mention, you just mentioned that your pride are your clients and your work. This man has been named Rising Star for 10 years straight. And that's not nothing, but we love an answer and we love an attorney where you know that your main focus is not how big you are, but your clients, your big leap, and your ability to give yourself and your work to them. And that's a great motto, to think that if your main point is the amount of work you're going to put into your clients, that is the type of handling that you want in your life and in your cases. And a very modest attorney, if we may add.
I'll share one story real quick. This meant a lot to me recently. I have a client that it's a case where we had to argue in front of a judge whether his case gets to go to a trial or not. And a particular client, lost eyesight in one of his eyes as a result of a workplace injury.
Oh, God.
And the client, it was a Zoom hearing. We were in the technological area. So he attended the hearing via Zoom. And beforehand, I'd set expectations. I'd told him, we could win, we could lose. It's ultimately going to be up to this judge whether we're allowed to present your case to a jury or not. And he's been such a good client all throughout, always very understanding. He checks in with me every now and again to see how things are going. I'm always happy to update him. But after this hearing, I put my all into it, right? And I knew that I worked my butt off to get ready for this hearing and to present the arguments that I needed to present to this judge. And I think that we were right. What meant so much to me was after the hearing, this person who had been through this awful tragedy and who no doubt wants to succeed and wants to be compensated for his terrible catastrophic injury, he called me up and he said, after that, I really don't care about the outcome anymore. He said, I saw how much you cared about my case, how much you cared about me, and that means everything in the world to me. Sure, I'd still love to win, no doubt about it, but I feel like I've already won based on how much this clearly meant to you and how much effort you put into it. And I'll never forget that. I'll never forget him saying that, and because to me too, I want to win too. I really do. When you get the adrenaline flowing and the competitive nature, grew up around a football family. It kind of disarmed me when he said that, because he brought back what this is really about, which is doing the best we can to increase the likelihood of success the best we can. So that really meant a lot to me.
I could imagine, dealing with something so personal, so intricate of the human nature, a sight, and being able to see the effort in someone else to the point where if we win or we lose, this was as important to you as it was for me. And I think that's a very defining thing in someone's career, and knowing that this is not the first or last moment in your career where you're going to have that type of, comments made by you. As we've been speaking, your approach is definitely defined by your effort on your clients. And we thank you very much for sharing that with us. That's such a great story to learn about who you are, not only as a person, but as an attorney. And we've mentioned, medical malpractice. This was a work-related accident, and a lot of things, may feel like they're not correlated when it comes to what is the difference between a car accident and medical malpractice. We mentioned product liability, and there's just a lot of things that can encompass personal injury. And, do you believe that Conn Law would have a unifying approach to all of this different type of situation, or do you feel like it is handled specifically in different ways based on the type of incident that it could happen?
I think that's a great question. And I think it's more the former than the latter. It is that there is a unifying way to handle each and every one of these cases. Again, I've been very fortunate throughout my career to have a lot of variety in the types of cases that I've worked on. You mentioned medical malpractice, products liability, road defects, heavy truck wrecks, car crashes. I've even done some business tort type cases. But I think the thing that I bring even to a car wreck case, right? Car wreck cases are usually simpler types of cases than a medical malpractice case, obviously. But I bring the same sort of approach to a car wreck case that I would to a product liability case or a medical malpractice case. So not that there's a ton of really good car wreck lawyers out there. But not having the experience in some of these more complex cases, I think that is the thing that I bring that not every attorney is able to. I look at it, especially in a car wreck case, sometimes there might be other elements of other types of cases you can bring. There's been several instances throughout my career where somebody gets in a car wreck, somebody else hit them. That person has, minimum insurance limits or no insurance at all. And so they've got an awful catastrophic injury or a wrongful death case where there's only $25,000 in insurance. That's not going to compensate them. So I'm able to bring, sort of an approach that I look at the totality of the evidence, all aspects of the case. Again, was there a product liability issue that led to that car wreck? Maybe the person that ran into them isn't at fault. Maybe they had a tire defect, a tire blowout, or maybe they had some other mechanical issue. Maybe the government, that wherever they got in the car wreck, didn't maintain the roads. Was there, a pothole that shouldn't have been there? Or was there pooling of water? Was it raining? Is there some sort of hydroplaning incident for a road defect case? And so I think the unifying thing for me is don't just look at the low-hanging fruit, look at the totality of the circumstances to really understand if there's an avenue that you can pursue for a potential recovery for a client.
I hear that the expected themes of this is that you bring a very personalized attention to things, a very deep investigation of, protecting the rights of the person that was injured. I think that comes very much into the values, the vision, and the person that is behind Conn Law Firm. Every firm has their own values. Everyone lives by a different mean. But do you think that you have a very specific principle when it comes to guiding the way that you run Conn Law?
Yeah, I think it just goes back to treating every client with dignity and respect, no matter what type of case it is, whether, again, it's medical malpractice or products liability or a car wreck case or, a trip and fall or a nursing home case, whatever it is, everybody deserves dignity. And so just sort of approaching every case, understanding that this is somebody's mother or daughter or brother or sister, and just working my butt off to try to see if there's something that I can help them with. I think that's the one thing that I bring to every single case that I'm fortunate enough to have the opportunity to represent someone on.
I think it really comes back to your background and how you've handled everything. And, you've held almost every leadership position at this point within the Georgia Trial Lawyers Association. In my research, as you may see, I see a lot of education chair memberships, new lawyers division. There's so much more. We also learned that you're a great advocate for children's right, which is, the heart of the questions. You mentioned that you have your family, and that is very, unfortunately, that is a little unusual for people your age and your background and the drive that you've had. Would you say that this brings back to your profession or not just the practice of it? I feel like it's a very defining trait in your personality when it comes to who you are as a person.
Yeah, if you ask my wife, she would tell you very clearly that I don't know how to say no. I have a very difficult time doing that. As you mentioned, I've been on the executive committee for the Georgia Trial Lawyers Association now for, I think it's 10, 11 years for the majority of my practice, frankly. I'm also serving as the chair of the PAC board for the Civil Justice PAC, which is related to that organization. And Georgia Trial Lawyers Association has been very good to me and has certainly, it's been very beneficial to my career, on a selfish level. But I do, because of that, because of how much I appreciate it and how much good work they're doing to try to protect everyday Georgians' rights from large insurance corporations who are trying to take away those rights every single day. I try to give back, and I try to really put everything I can into the organization to make it better, because while they make me better, I hope I make them just a little bit better as well. You also mentioned, I think, the Bright Side board, It's the local CASA chapter for essentially kids. They're in foster care here in Chatham County, Georgia. We provide CASA as an advocate who goes to bat for these youths in court, and we provide a lot more than that. But that's been such a great organization to be a part of, and I've really learned a lot. It helps me, frankly, to understand some of my clients better at times. But it's an organization that I feel has done a lot for me, and I hope that I've done, something for it as well.
And we're very sure that you must and they must, it's a very giving, receiving type of situation where as much as you learn from them, they're going to learn from you, and as much as they give to you, you're going to give to them. And, having that type of humanization when it comes to life in general is such an important thing to be in that position and a part of it. And I noticed you mentioned your wife may say that you're not able to say no. I imagine it comes to a very stagnant position when it comes to tough decisions. When you're faced with a very tough call of, should we settle? Should we go to trial? How should I advise this client on this very difficult choice? Being someone that is not able to say no, how do you put your lawyer hat on, and what is it that helps you decide what is the right move when it comes to those tough decisions?
Those are a little bit easier. When I say I can't say no, it's to people who ask me to
Help.
Get involved or to donate or to volunteer or to be on a board of some sort. I have a very difficult time saying no there. When it comes to my clients, though, and whether or not to settle, again, I've never told a client, you have to settle this case or you have to go to trial in this case. I tell them this is what my experience trying cases and frankly losing some of those trials, right? The risk that's involved in going to trial. And, at the end of the day, I can only tell you what the range of possibilities are and the likelihood of those possibilities. But at the end of the day, it's your case, each and every client's case. They get to decide the fate of the case, whether or not it goes to trial. Sometimes the insurance companies make very big mistakes and don't even give them the opportunity to settle. That $16 million verdict you mentioned earlier, they offered us $0. So they made it very easy for my clients to go to trial in that case. There are other cases, though, where there is, large offers on the table. And all I'm here to do is to be, the person who can give them advice and ultimately put it in their hands, let them make the decision. I will say, probably the question I get asked the most in those hard decisions on settlements, they say, well, what if I was your mom? Or what if I was your brother? Or what if I was your sister? And one thing I always tell them, and this is so true, is I've been treating you like you're my mom or you're my sister this entire time. In fact, I have a fiduciary obligation to you. And so it's at times they will say, what would you do if this was your sister? And I will say, I really think this is something that you need to seriously consider taking. Or I'll say, this is something that I don't really think is enough for your case. But if you decide to take it, I can live with it, and I'm on board with whatever you want to do.
Wow. It's such a good thing to listen and have that secure information, because I can imagine people being like, yeah, but if this was your mother, would you? And it's the fact that we come back to you, treat them as the human they are, and not just as a client that will come and go. And speaking about new clients, I feel like it's very important for anyone listening who's been in a car accident or needs or has the need for a personal injury lawyer and isn't really sure on what to do next. Is there any particular way that they can reach out? How do you believe it would be the best way to reach out to you or your team?
Yeah, so there's a number of different ways. Probably the best way is just call the office and either leave a voicemail or talk to our legal receptionist who does a lot of sort of the early intake work. She gets a lot of information from us. But call, email. We have an email, info@connlawfirm.com. Or come on into the office. We are actually local here in Savannah. Have an office in Atlanta as well. The Atlanta office is one that we would need some prior notice before sitting down and having me meet with you. I'm there quite a bit, but home base is here in Savannah. But yeah, whether you're thinking at home, is this a case? Do I need a lawyer for this? I've told people at times, you don't need me. You don't need a lawyer. Do this. Here's some advice. Don't pay me, whatever the contingency fee is to do this. You can do this on your own, but I'll help you. I'll answer some questions for you. I'll do that for free. Or I'll be honest with you and I'll say, listen, you either need me or you need somebody else who's a lawyer, because the insurance company is not going to take you very seriously until you do. Or there's some complex issue that needs to be investigated that takes experience to understand what's potentially out there for you. So I just try to be honest with everybody and let them know the truth, whether I can help them or someone can help them, or whether they just need to do it on their own.
If there is someone listening right now, who has been in an accident last week, they're sitting at home, scrolling through their phone, thinking, maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe I should just handle this myself. Maybe I don't need a lawyer. This is directly to you. This is Andy Conn. And as we wrap up, one thing that I want to be very personal and clear, and that really stands out from our talk, is that navigating life after a car accident isn't just about the legal steps. It's about feeling supported, informed, and definitely heard. Andy, we really want to thank you for sharing your perspective and giving us a closer look to how you approach this work. Before we finish, I would love if, leave our listeners with one final thought. If someone here would forget everything that we've spoken about and does not remember this entire conversation, but does remember one thing about you and how you practice law, what would you hope that is?
That's a tough question, but first of all, I appreciate you having me on here, and this has been fun. But the one thing I hope people take away is that, every case is so unique and every client is so unique, and their pain or their tragedy or the loss of a loved one is very important to them. And it's always been very important to me. I got some really bad advice in law school to not take cases personally. I think that's the worst advice any young lawyer could have, because I take cases very personally. I take the tragedies and the heartaches and the pain that my clients suffer from very personally. And I try to, again, treat them like family when I'm pursuing their case or evaluating their case. So I hope that's the one thing that folks take away from this is I'm here for you. I want to help you. And hopefully there's something I can do to make that happen.
Thank you very much, Andy. We do hope that is what they stick with. I truly and personally believe that, Conn Law is a law firm that really does care deeply about their clients. And if for anyone listening, if you or someone you care about has been injured or needs a personal injury lawyer, is uncertain about what to do next, the team at Conn Law is most definitely available to help. You can speak directly with them or, visit connlaw.com. A thoughtful and very informed conversation most definitely can provide clarity like we've been speaking about. They can explain your legal options and help you determine what would be the best path forward depending on your situation. My name is Anna. This is the U Interview. Thank you very much for spending your time with us today. Andy, it was a pleasure to have you here. We'll be back soon with another episode that will be focused on real people, meaningful conversation like the one we just had with Andy, and a purposeful work. We do hope everyone stays safe. Andy, thank you very much for being here with us today. And it was a pleasure to speak with you today.
Thank you, Anna.